So welcome back to Design for Impact. Today we'll be talking about a brief introduction to prototyping. I want to start by a story, which was one project that we were working on was basically tackling malnutrition in Nepal. And there was this idea basically, or like we were trying to create almost like a sustainable model for tackling this issue. And that means business was involved, government was involved. There was a company that was creating like the fortified foods to give to kids. And the target group really were parents of children who were like between the ages of 0 and 12. So I think it was like some statistics were something like 40% of kids were stunted by the time they were teenagers. So we really wanted to prevent that issue. And what we decided to prototype was a bit complex, but I think it needed to be. So what we decided to do was get the company to produce the fortified food. And then instead of like just testing whether parents would actually buy it or not, what we did was we sent out all these researchers into different villages in Nepal and got them to hand out like a 3 days worth of fortified food to the parents, and then help them understand how to cook it and things like that. And then through that prototype, what we were actually testing, we were testing quite a few things. We were testing like whether the taste would actually be appealing to children. And because children are almost like these like monsters in little packages, because if they really like the taste, they can apply a lot of pressure. The second thing we were testing was basically the community's reaction to that, and who from the community leaders and elders we can help us by getting behind this. The third thing we were testing as well was whether parents would actually go to the store that they knew stocked this product after the 3 days, and whether they'd actually be willing to spend money on this fortified food. And that's like the idea about prototyping in complex systems, right? It's not just like a digital product or service where you're just testing like whether it's technically possible to develop the solution or whether people understand how to use the solution. It's almost like you need to look at the community as a whole and what the potential risks are with this prototype that you're creating, and what you can learn about that and how you can change your idea to suit. One of the quotes that really stick out to me when we're talking about prototyping is this one by Ray Bradbury. And he says, if you hide your ignorance, no one will hit you and you'll never learn. And that's like the idea behind prototyping, right? Prototyping is not just like something that we do just once, and it's actually something that we keep on doing even as we're evolving the product or the service that we're using to tackle this complex problem, in order to keep learning and keep refining. Any thoughts about that so far, Brian or Darina? Cool, awesome. So the first question I wanted to ask you was, what does prototyping mean to you? I put the Miro link in the chat. Brian, I don't know if you've accessed the Miro before. I don't think so. But basically, I want you to have a think and a chat about what does prototyping mean to you, and then use Google search or something, or whatever search engine you want, to find an image that comes to mind when you hear the word prototyping. Darina, do you have access to the Miro board?
Okay.
Cool, you're in. So you'll see the first board like below one that's yellow. You can also click on my image in the top right-hand corner to come to where I am. Yeah, there you are. So this is where you can put your image and share your thoughts on what prototyping means to you.
Okay.
So to create a post-it note, Brian, all you need to do is just double click, and then it will create a post-it note for you. Are you all good? Brian, feel free to share your thoughts as well out loud.
Okay. My spelling's horrible, so I'm a slow typist as I'm trying to. I'm just thinking my way through. I think of prototyping as a kind of a first step of a physical representation of the idea of, or the ideas of, what this product can mean. It's like the various concepts of what it is coming together in some form, and you get to actually see it I was in architecture, and my mind can run about trying to visualize how some architectural feature might look, but it really takes drawing it, hashing it out to really actually understand how it actually would work.
Yeah.
And work with that physical representation and play around with that versus just the ideas and concepts, which can be misleading. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'll share a quote soon about that idea of you actually need to work your way through it. You can't just think your way through it. Cool. Awesome.
Okay, I think I got the Post-it note then. Okay, I didn't know how it worked. I think there's one there. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I said what image comes to mind when you think about prototyping?
I think of architecture. I think of prototyping in is like working with a foam board and carving something up and quickly hodgepodging it together with the scraps and materials that you can find to get a quick understanding of how things work.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. That's cool. Dorina was sharing before that she's an interior designer, so we got a few architects in the house today. Cool. So I looked up prototyping, the definition, and I couldn't really find a definition that I actually liked. So I created my own. I said it's a tangible thing that can be used to test our hypothesis with stakeholders. And that might be just testing it with myself in terms of am I creating what I envisioned in my head? It might be testing it with the team, but it also might be testing with the community, right? If it's an architectural building or something, you might be testing it with the people who are going to buy this building or live in the building or use the building. Or you might also use it to test the idea with the community and present this is how we view it to work. How does that what do they feel about that? I wanted to talk as well about prototyping for complex systems versus prototyping for digital products and services, because I think that they're very similar in terms of the mindsets. Like you're creating a physical or a tangible thing that you're using to test your hypothesis around, but I think they're slightly different. So I think prototyping complex systems, I think it's focused more on value, impact, and relationships, right? Because of the complex nature of the system, you really need to focus on the value, the potential impact, both positive and negative, and also use the prototype to build relationships and get people on board or help people shape their vision for the future. Whereas I think prototyping for digital products and services, you're focused more on technical ability, right? Is this idea actually feasible? Is it usable? Do people understand and appreciate the value? I think prototyping complex systems, they're typically service oriented, right? So it's let's create this product as part of a service, or let's create this service. Whereas digital products and services, we're usually talking about paper or digital interfaces, which you can use to explain your idea or test your idea. And then I think the third one is prototyping complex systems focuses more on engaging the community, which it might impact, and understanding the broader impacts of that prototype or idea. Whereas prototyping for digital products and services engages people who are likely to use the product or service. So I'm imagining Uber, and again, this is just an assumption, but I imagine Uber didn't go out to taxi drivers and people like that to test their idea, because if they did, then they would have understood the backlash. Whereas what Uber would have likely done was test it with people who need income and who have newer cars and are happy to use their cars as taxi, and then people who need transport, right? So it's very digital products and services is very much focused on the people who are going to be using or creating the product or service versus actually the broader community and the impacts and the broader impacts that has. Cool. So the next question I wanted to discuss was why do you think we should, or why do you think it's important, or maybe it's not important to prototype when we're tackling a complex problem? What value do we derive from that as opposed to not doing it, or as opposed to doing something else? Brian or Dorina, any thoughts that you wanted to share?
Yeah. Let me just finish the sentence here. I guess two things. I feel like prototyping can be actually the real start of the conversation in the sense of moving outside of the ideas of individuals that they have towards something that's between the community and individuals. It's not owned by anyone in particular. Also, I think it really helps to flesh out questions and unforeseen things that otherwise couldn't be seen by just trying to communicate an idea across from each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think almost like the process of prototyping is almost like inherently like a conversation that creates something tangible. And it's not prototyping needs to be like in a closed room of like experts or people. It's actually you can invite whoever you want to into a co-creation session to create a prototype. What about you, Dorina? Any thoughts?
Hi, yes, sorry about that. My colleague called me just then. Yeah, so I think for prototype when tackling a complex problem for me is like a tool for validation because it's a parameter that is tangible, so you can see it, and also to understand what is not said about an idea, because an idea, you can have opinions about idea, but then when having prototype, there are the reaction of people who reacts to it, the behavior. That's to observe what is not said.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'll share a story shortly about an example of that. So here's a few more reasons as well to like prototype solutions or interventions for complex problems. The first one is understanding and engaging with the system as a system. So that includes people and organizations and government and so on, and understand the potential impact also both like directly and indirectly, right? What potential does this idea have that will be better? And it's the future that we want to see. And then what potential impacts that could be negative, right? Cool. The second one is, like you said, Brian, it's like it can be used as a tool for building relationships with people in the community. So instead of, and I guess one word of caution is don't just build a prototype in a closed room and then go and take it for people. That's like super risky. What you want to do is you want to be having conversations and co-creation sessions like all the way throughout that help you frame the problem, that help you understand the areas that you could intervene in, because the last thing you'd want to do is have a completely shallow understanding of the problem and then propose a solution that people in the community like outright reject. And then the third reason I think is to create and share compelling stories for change. And I would say co-create and share compelling stories for change, right? Because ultimately design isn't about creating the world that one group of people want to see. It's about creating the world that we all want to see. And it's about that, like you said, Brian, is like creating that shared future that everyone benefits from. One of the things that I came across when I was preparing for this talk was like the idea of prototyping where you're choosing like the flip. You're choosing like the riskiest area or the biggest assumptions that you're making, and you're testing those as a way to be like, okay, onboarding, for example, or getting people across this service might not be very difficult, but actually what will be really difficult is that when they start engaging with it. So if you're, or the opposite might happen, right? Like onboarding might be really difficult, but once people are like experiencing the service, it will be much easier. Think about like contraceptive ideas and things like that in low income communities, say in Africa or Southeast Asia or places like that. It's actually, there's going to be we're going to need a big behavior change and change the societal norms around this idea to make it safe and okay for people to engage. Yeah, choosing like the flip, using a BMX example to think about what are we going to prototype here. And we'll talk more about that next week with Charlie as well. So the last thing I wanted to discuss was, what do you think the different approaches to prototyping are? So it might be like things that you've done or things that you've heard about. Yeah, but what approaches can you think of when it comes to prototyping? Darina, do you want to share your thoughts about different approaches that you've used or heard of when it comes to prototyping?
Well, the theory has like a low fidelity, medium fidelity, and high fidelity. But I think like the approaches could be like making like a physical mock-up, and also I think like a framework, or as Brian said, storyboard. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you have any sort of stories of like prototypes that you've used to test things and you found helpful?
Yeah, for my like current project. So we're actually want to build a system for refill vending machine. And so when we thought that is a good idea, when we make a prototype, we make a really low minimum viable product. It's just like a physical mock-up, but like really low technology and everything, and test to the customers whether they want to adopt the system or not. And from there we learn to like what is needed from the behavior and the reaction from the customer, and what needed to improve, what needed to take out from it. Yeah, that was like my current experience in prototyping.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. What about you, Brian? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I thought of the same thing. Just the physical mock-up of the item. It seemed like if it's a service or something, it's a series of interactions that occur in trying to find out the order of those things. One goes about approaching something, that storyboarding, it's not a mock-up of a physical thing. And then I guess there's testing, which is different than I wrote down role playing. Like it really depends on what it is as far as, okay, so part of it is an interaction that's part of the product. Let's role play to see if that actually works with community members or something like that.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, it's almost like what you're saying, right? So what you were saying before in terms of like sometimes role playing or putting yourself in that situation and acting things out, you're like, oh crap, we forgot this step, or maybe we need to introduce something here or take something out. Awesome. Very nice. So I often think about prototyping in terms of fidelity, like Darina was saying, but also in terms of risk. And I think you can use like conversations and sketches and storyboards and Lego and stuff as pretty helpful ways, I think, to understand people's intentions and potential impact, or sort of talk through potential impact. I think it's pretty difficult, though, to actually measure impact and behaviors without going to something tangible and physical that people experience, which is really interesting, right? Like a lot of times we start with sketches and storyboards. So we worked on this project around domestic and family violence. That was the basic idea, is to introduce some legal expertise into the health system so that people can openly talk with a lawyer without needing to pursue legal action. So just to understand their options as opposed to going to court and things like that. And initially we used storyboarding to test the idea with like healthcare professionals and lawyers and things like that, and understand potential implications. And that helped us refine our idea and prototype so that when we went to a physical model in terms of, okay, let's actually start training a few nurses in terms of like how they could refer to this legal service, that was really helpful. But it wasn't until we created this like actual experience, or physical experience, you could say, that we could then understand a bit more about, maybe patients or maybe nurses and maybe lawyers need to be embedded into the clinic at the hospital so that it's really easy for the nurse to refer to them, as opposed to just being remote or virtual. Like you both said, physical models, you can do role plays, you can do Wizard of Oz. I don't know if anyone has heard of Wizard of Oz, but it's basically, it looks like a real prototype, but actually behind the scenes, there's like a human or someone that's like processing what it is. So for the refill station, maybe it's, you don't actually create a real refill station. You create like a wall where people put in a bottle, and then instead of actually having a refill station, it's just a human sort of handing them back a recyclable or bottle or money or whatever it is. Like in Australia, you put in your bottle and you get coins out the other end. This is the quote that I was talking to earlier, in terms of, you don't think your way to creative work, you work your way to creative thinking, right? It's, I think, like our society puts a lot of sort of emphasis around thinking and being abstract and things like that. But I think when it comes to complex systems, it's really important to actually create tangible things and take action as a way to learn and reflect. Otherwise, we're stuck in this like thinking and then thinking and more thinking loop where we don't actually have an impact. We're just thinking about our impact. And then to end our session today, which is, don't underestimate the ripple effect of what you do, both in terms of like your direct community, but the communities that you're helping or that you're serving. And it's really important, obviously, to keep that in mind, because when you're testing your prototype, you're not always just looking for direct impacts of your prototype, but you're also looking at indirect impacts. Again, like thinking about the butterfly effect when it comes to complex systems. So that's all for today. Does anyone have any questions about what?
For me, I think it's really insightful. Thank you so much for having this. I was just wondering if I can have the slides from your presentation.
Yeah, of course. We typically put the slides out on Slack, so I just posted a link on Slack. Join us there, and then you'll find all the slides and all the materials there as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Darina, and thanks
Yeah,
for
I hope I can join more. It's really interesting what you guys do here. I'm just starting to learn again about all this design and product making.
Yeah, cool.
Excited.
No, it'll be awesome to have you. Next, Brian, did you have any questions?
Not about the presentation, no. Yeah, no, it was pretty good.
Yeah, cool. Next week we'll have Charlie talking about, he's had a lot of experience designing services and solutions or interventions to complex problems in Africa and Asia and places like that. So he'll be talking about how to get started with actually designing your prototype or prototyping your idea.
Cool. So we're going to mess around doing some prototyping, if I understood right?
Yeah. So this so this week, what we're going to do is we're going to get you into teams.
Gotcha.
And then in your teams, you'll pick an idea this week. And then next week, you'll actually, based on the session, you'll start physically prototyping your idea for the problem that you've chosen.
And this correspondence happened in Slack. I'm still picking up the Slack, so to speak, with how to work with Slack. But
yeah. We usually run most things off Slack, and then we share the links to the content and things like that. But if
Gotcha.
I'll also be sending an email, that way people get a nudge to join Slack and to find what they need. Yeah.
So I'll look for that under the prototyping to learn will be that correspondence, and then eventually if we have groups or teams, that will break out into its own thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming in. It was good to see you, and welcome, Darina. It was good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you all. Right. Hope to see you guys again soon. Okay. Have a good one all. Bye.
Bye.